Well, Dave, how are things in the great state of Idaho?
It's warming up. There's only like 20 feet of snow packed on most of the snow. It's a fun update for everyone. Apparently, most of the trails are actually closed till middle of May because it's it's going good. It's going a little cold, getting a little antsy after week 6 or month 72 in quarantine. Whatever we are at this point.
Yeah,
How are things in Birmingham?
they're about the same.
Yeah.
Just kind of feel like I'm living Groundhog Day here. But you know, we're just trucking along, just doing what we can do, and keep going.
And for everyone watching on video, I think that we're all going to know your grandmother's house, aka your quarantine bunker, extremely well from all of the different angles that you've been giving us. It feels like every time we
Right.
get up to do a podcast, I got a different background, but you're in a different part of grandma's house, aka
That's
the
right. We
quarantine
have
bunker.
we have some different antique fineries to show you here. So
I
I don't know
like
what
it.
any of this stuff is, but
It's the cover of
and
Southern Living.
yeah, that's pretty close actually. Yeah, and your background is pretty epic. So evidently, you guys encountered a moose just like going to the store.
Yeah, yeah. So we were out over the weekend, close to the Utah border, and I look over my shoulder in these basically cow pastures that were half flooded, and I'm like, "That's a moose. It's eating the tree." And Beth, my wife, is like, It's not the first time we've seen a moose, as you guys can see from the picture behind me, but it's the first that we've ever encountered 5 feet away from the road that we could turn around. So we turned around and we slowed down a little bit, and she's like, "Crap, that is a moose." And so we turned around one more time. So this was the third time we now have driven by it, and the moose is like 8 feet tall. I think it was
Wow.
a female moose. There were no antlers of anything. It was eating, the buds on the trees all by itself, and it was probably 5 miles from the nearest woodland that wasn't this small brush of trees. Every once in a while, you find some weird stuff. That was the first Western United States moose that we had seen.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So it's not nearly as exciting, but I had a few wildlife encounters. So we have one raccoon that stays around our place, and if I don't put the can on the trash can, he
Hmm.
like rewards me for that behavior, and tears our trash up. So yeah, it's kind of gone from the point to like, oh, we have this cute raccoon that hangs
Hmm.
out too. I think I'm gonna have to do something about it, so I'm gonna have to deal with that this week. And then yesterday, Molly sends me a picture, middle of the day, and there's like this massive groundhog just like hanging out in the backyard, like eating the grass, doing his thing. So yeah, so now we have Petey the raccoon and Gary the groundhog that have been making appearances.
I
So
I
hey,
like it.
this is quarantine life. That's the kind of stuff that gets you excited now, you know?
Raccoons and groundhogs and small children running around and you trying to corral them so they don't get rabies, all the good things that people growing up today would have missed when they would have done things like go to school or basketball practice or hang out with friends or watch
That's
the
right.
watch the YouTube internet.
Yep, that's right. So yeah, so there's our life update for this week, and sounds like more of the same. But let's get into today's topic. So today we're going to talk about one of mine and Dave's favorite things to talk about, and that's gear, Apple
Hmm.
gear, the devices that we own, what we use, why we have them, and yeah, just kind of go through some of that, and then maybe talk about some of the new stuff that recently come out. So
Definitely.
why don't you get us started, Dave?
Yeah, so I just want to set the scene for everyone so they understand the gear that we're talking about. So the first time that I went to the Beloved Robot offices in Birmingham, I walked in and you're like blasted by all of these pictures and figurines of robots. And then you notice like a 4 foot long section of shelf and it's just boxes of iPhones. And I look at it and I'm like, Jarrod, why do you have so many iPhones? And he's like, oh, I don't have all of them, but I have all of the boxes. And so just so everyone knows, Jarrod is the person that saves the box. I'm the person that can never find the box because there's no space in my life for extra boxes. If there are boxes somewhere, they may be in my mother's basement. But other than that, there are no boxes in my life. And so I was thoroughly impressed with the number of iPhone boxes that Jarrod had. I think he's had at least one iteration of all of them. And then a couple of months ago, which feels like, I don't know, 20 years ago, we were in New Orleans at a trade show and he flops open a couple of additional iPhones. I don't remember. Were they the X?
They were, yeah, the 10R actually.
Okay,
The
so
10R.
they were the 10R, and he's like, "Yeah, I needed a couple more iPhones for demos. You know, you can never have enough iPhones." And yeah, so Jarrod is very much along the lines of you can never have enough iPhones. And
So I mean, let's just set the scene here. So, as a buddy of mine and I like to joke around, like, I need it for my work, Dave. It's part of my work, right?
that's
So
what I tell Beth every week when I get a new
yeah,
shipment in.
yeah. My buddy George is like you. He does some video work, and he's always looking at the newest, hottest, latest thing. And the Mac Pro comes out, and he's like, "Man, I really need this for my work. I really need this for my work." So in fairness, like, I don't hunt, I don't fish, I don't play golf. I don't really have any hobby other than I buy the new iPhone when it comes out every year. It's just kind of my thing. And it is part of my job too, also. So yes, when it comes to recommending phones or knowing which ones are best, which ones aren't great, I'm probably a pretty good resource on that front. So on my side, I'm fully kitted out with Apple stuff. So I'm sort of bought into that ecosystem all the way down to MacBooks, iPhones, iPads, Apple TV, the whole thing. And so that's kind of my setup. Dave, you have a little bit. Your setup is not extremely more diverse than mine, but at least a little bit in some way.
I feel like I feel like I have a confession to make to everyone after listening to us gush about Apple. I don't own an iPhone. I don't really like iOS as it currently stands. It doesn't really work in my brain, and I say that sitting here with a, I suppose now almost 4-month-old 2020 MacBook Pro maxed out in all of the specs. That was a warranty return of a 2019 MacBook Pro that was maxed out to all of the specs in a 12.9-inch iPad Pro. So I say that iOS as a whole doesn't necessarily work in my mind. Google Pixel, this is a 3A XL. I appreciate that Google has gone down that like iPhone and Apple route where we just throw a whole bunch of numbers and letters and hope that people realize what they mean. Jarrod and I have been talking about this new iPhone SE that's coming out, and every article I read about it, it literally says no one knows what to call it. And so that is just the funniest thing in the entire world. And in my mind, I like the $350 to like $450 phone. I think that works for most people. Before that, I had gone down the route and had a original Google Pixel XL, and then I had a Pixel 3 XL, and then I had a bunch of Google phones, right?
Yeah.
I did own an iPhone for work at one point. I think it was the iPhone 4. It was really tiny. Even compared to the like Samsung S4 that I had around the same time. The iPhone 4 was fairly tiny, and yeah, so I had that for work for a little while, and then I had one other in there, I think an earlier one for a little while. And so I have owned iPads, right? So Jarrod and I own a lot of iPads between the two of us. Yeah, there was at one point where Jared's like, "Yeah, I'll just send you an iPad with some software on it because it's easier than having you go through and download Xcode." And so I've owned a couple of iPads in the last year. Currently, I've got the 12.9-inch iPad Pro 2018 with the Apple Pencil. And as I said, Apple did something amazing when they downloaded or when they started shipping iPad OS. It's like, this is exactly the iPad that this is the OS that I've always wanted on my iPad. And the iPad Pro is kind of like the iPad that I've always wanted to have. Not only can I use it as a relatively normal sized second screen, but I can also draw on it with a pencil that actually works as opposed to most of the stylists. There were a lot of years with a lot of crappy stylists that I had tried out. And so, no, it feels like the iPad OS is basically exactly what I have been looking for. It works really well with my MacBook Pro. As I've told Jarrod, I would even consider buying an iPhone to get into the ecosystem if they just give me something like a USB-C connector in my headphones. I really like my headphones. I really do.
Yeah. Well, you're a dying breed, Dave. That ship has sailed, unfortunately. I think even on the Google side, they're removing the headphone jacks in the new phone. So
So on the new like quote unquote flagships they are, but on the A line, they the kind of like, and it's almost terrible to say a $400 or $500 phone is a now like mid-tier phone.
yeah.
But on those phones, most for at least the next iteration, I've heard that they're going to keep the headphone jack, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the iPad topic is particularly interesting. I think right now and we're in sort of like this inflection point. Like I think there's a so I guess in 2018 at WWDC, Apple announced like, okay, we're sort of forking iOS and we're going to make iPad OS and iOS. And so basically now you have iOS, which is for the phone devices, iPad OS, which is for the iPad, and then you have Mac OS, which is kind of its own thing. So this was sort of like, so my relationship with the iPad going back was, and I think this is sort of the case for a lot, I mean, for everyone that's had an iPad, is it's sort of this like in-between device. It's like, okay, well, it's not portable enough as my phone. So there's certain core functions that I just do on my phone are easier to do on my phone, right? But then there's like work stuff that is like very typing intensive, and it takes a lot of like, you know, focus and brain power, and I really need to see things side by side, maybe stuff like that. And so for those type of more like work functions, well, my laptop is just like a better machine for that. I mean, like, you know, all this talk of like, oh, the iPad is going to kill the laptop. I mean, that's just, that's mostly bullshit. Like the laptop is almost like the perfect device in a lot of ways. But so the iPad just kind of lived in this zone, even for me, who's someone who's building like apps that are going out in the field and people are using these. Like it sort of lived in this zone for me personally as like, you know, it's a great device to like have sitting in the kitchen when I'm cooking and have a recipe up. I mean, it's pretty good for note taking. I love watching videos on it. Like it's a great YouTube device and Netflix device. So yeah, so it sort of lived in that zone for a long time, and it really was a kind of non-essential device for me for years. But when this new iPad came out, the same one that Dave has, I have the smaller version of it. First of all, the industrial design of the device is absolutely incredible. It might maybe be my favorite device design-wise that Apple's ever made. But the sort of having the Face ID and all these other functions in there really kind of elevated it to the next level. So it became, and the Apple Pencil support. I had that in a previous iPad, but it never really resonated with me in the way that the new one does. And I think it's like a convenience thing. You can just snap it to the magnet on the top. And so having that really was kind of a game changer for me too. So that's all that kind of leading up to a month ago, Apple released a new update for iPad OS and this, what they're calling the Magic Keyboard. And I've been holding for this one, even though I've had this for about a week.
Jarrod.
I've been awaiting this moment. So yeah, so here is, I've spent about a week with this new keyboard. And so this keyboard, what's interesting about this keyboard is, unlike previous Apple keyboards, this one comes with a cursor. So they've sort of, I mean, it's sort of like a tectonic shift in the world of iOS that Apple has conceded in some way that people actually like a cursor, and that sort of paradigm of keeping your hands down on the keyboard and moving things around actually kind of works. But putting that aside, it's really incredible. I mean, especially when it comes to those like pivoting more into those like work type of things, like long form writing, checking email, just like switching apps, being able to command tab through apps. Man, it's a game changer, and I can't wait for you to get your hands on one, Dave, and see what you think about it.
So I'm really excited. I think we certainly have had conversations about it, and I'm actually, I appreciate the unveiling live on the podcast. I would have like really appreciated to know what you thought of it in the last week, but no. So I along with you, Jarrod. So there are certain things that I'm always going on my, like, for example, most video conferencing is just makes so much more sense on Mac OS or a computer than it does on an iPad. And like video editing for me, that's something that I need the horsepower of a computer, which is why I bought the computer. But for almost everything else, I've tried the keyboards. I had don't know, right? It was like 4 years ago that they launched whatever that 9.7, 9.2 inch iPad was. And so I
Yeah.
bought one of those hard shell, like clam cases with the keyboards. And I'm like, I'm going to be able to take this to park. I'm going to be able to go do things. I'm like, I'm going to be able to go to customers. I'm going to be able to do everything I want on this iPad. And it didn't work. And it's kind of like, I've been waiting for that point. And like, I feel like most people like, and the price that we're talking about lots of these things, like that's an iPad Air, or that's, a bunch of Chromebook. But
Yeah.
and I mean, it's almost ridiculous to say, hey, I bought a $400 keyboard to go with my $1,200 iPad.
That's
And I'm
right.
like, well,
I
I
love
spent
that. That's a
it's
stack of Chromebooks.
it is. It's a stack of Chromebooks. Like all of Beth's computers literally cost less, and she's got at least two, because we don't want to get into that. They would cost less. They actually would cost less than this 12.9 inch iPad, much less a 12.9 inch iPad with a $400 keyboard. But no, I'm also to the point of, I really want a keyboard. I feel like if I could put a keyboard on the iPad, then I could take it more places. Then while I'm doing something with my computer, I can go and sit there and type. And I feel like I would love to do that, especially with all of the integration. And I'm gonna throw out an app that I really like. It's Drafts.
Oh yeah,
And
it's a great app.
it is. And so I love it. That's actually where I do most of my writing in. And my personal blog is the black with the light color, almost not exactly in Markdown. It's more standardized for the rest of humanity. But I do all of my
Right.
I do all of my typing in Markdown, and the ability to be able to integrate the drafts on my computer with the drafts on my iPad and be able to type on either of them. I mean, that is like everything that I've looked for. So I am currently in the market for a keyboard. I don't know.
So I do have a tip for you.
Mhm.
So there is one sort of way that you can sort of test this out before you have to make this. So like, let's say you have one of these new iPads, an iPad Pro. If you have a mouse, if you have a Bluetooth mouse or the Magic Trackpad thing, you can go ahead, like today, you can pair your mouse with the iPad and play around with the cursor and the new thing. So that's sort of what I did, is when they originally released it, I played with it and I'm like, man, this cursor thing is really cool. I think it's something that could really kind of up my productivity. And I think, like, I mean, you make a great point. It's just like, at the end of the day, we're like looking for reasons to buy new stuff. But there is sort of like I think specifically when it comes to like very focused tasks, like writing or research or drawing, stuff like this, like, to me, that's one of the strong points of iPad OS is when I'm on that iPad, like there's nothing else on there on the screen that's distracting me, right? When I'm on my Mac, there's like 50,000 windows. I'm moving in a million different directions. And like I'm extremely productive in that way. I can but there's a certain time when I'm trying to focus on one specific thing, like writing. I think that iPad OS really excels in that way, where it's just this one focused task that you can focus on and you can kind of channel your creativity through there. So that's one tip. It's just a thought, but yeah. So, I mean, I think one thing about, if you are interested in sort of upgrading your iPad and trying out iPad OS, the new iPads that came out are ridiculously expensive. Like Dave said, they're $1,000 or whatever. But the previous generation, which is the ones that me and Dave have, they've been discounted kind of across the board. So it is and it's a good time to get in, and those iPads work with the new Magic Keyboard if you want to get the new Magic Keyboard, and so on. So, it's very interesting to see. I think the future, this pivot has gotten me much more excited about the future of iPad OS and where it's going, and sort of gives me a glimpse of, hey, if I'm going on a work trip for a week, like there's a great potential that I could just stick this iPad in my bag and I'm good to go, whereas, 6 months ago, I would have never considered that.
Oh yeah.
So,
and especially with the ability to like bring an external hard drive with you, and now you can plug it into your iPad, and through the new-ish Files application, like I can actually get into the files, and That
Yeah.
for me, that was one of the big misses when I bought it originally, is they hadn't upgraded to that. But now being able to go and look at files that you normally carry around with you is starting to eliminate the need to carry, for most people, that significantly larger, significantly heavier laptop.
Yeah. So the sort of rumor mill is saying that over the next year, Apple's going to start bringing its truly pro apps to the iPad. So the first two that it's saying are going to come is Final Cut and Xcode. So that's interesting because you do video editing and I build apps. But I mean that really is sort of a core missing piece for me. It's like if there's an app that we're working on that I need to test on the fly, like I have to have my MacBook. There's no way
Yep.
around it. Like I can't get that. But even if it's not a version of Xcode that I can like work in day to day, if I could just pull down code, run an app and see how it works, like that would be a game changer for me.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on like from like the video side, being able to do some sort of like light editing?
I'm excited about it, but my excitement is kind of mild because when I bought the iPad, it had the Photoshop and Lightroom apps that theoretically should have worked. There have been lots of them. I think I think Lightroom kind of like Photoshop is like a super pro app. It's kind of like a Final Cut, right? And so most people don't need to get into that. But like if I could get Lightroom up and working, I mean, that's literally one of the reasons why I bought it, was so that I could have the pencil and so that I could sit there and do it by hand and get that interface that you can't get with the rest of the MacBook Pro. And so I'm excited about it. I don't think that it's ever going to fully replace a MacBook Pro for me. Now, could it, in theory, be the stop? Like, could we, in theory, make a more powerful iPad Pro, and that's what you use on the run, and then you come back home and you've got a ridiculously expensive Mac Pro where you do all of that stuff, or you can go ahead and push it up to the cloud and pull it back down, and I could have a desktop running while I am doing stuff on an iPad. I feel like that's certainly plausible. And I think that's interesting for a bunch of the like prosumer users who are really into the Apple ecosystem. And lots of people that I know are very excited about the Magic Keyboard and about the new generation of what Apple is doing. It felt like, there were a few years in there where it was like kind of questionable. And then we came out with the iPad Pro and everybody's like, yes, Apple is back. And then Apple didn't do anything for a couple of years. And then we had all of those issues with like the 16, 17, 18 MacBook Pros. And then they released the Mac Pro, which is for a very specific subset. And honestly, I'm super excited for it. If I had room, I may own one at this point, because I think for what it is a fantastic thing. It's just not a desktop for everyone. But Apple didn't come out to build a desktop for everyone, which I appreciate. It's the same reason you don't see everyone walking around with $5,000 MacBook Pros. Most people don't need a $5,000 MacBook Pro. The people that don't need a $5,000 MacBook Pro don't need to put $20,000 into a Mac Pro. I think that there's a very specific subset that it works for, and I'm excited about what Apple is doing. And just to kind of get back into the industrial side of things, I'm excited what they're doing for the industrial side. Like, this iPad literally makes me want to go mount it in the vehicle as I drive everywhere with cell phone service and with GPS, and run my maps or run the overlanding apps or all of those things in it. And I know it makes our customers want to run, the time tracking. And it's like, hey, I can install this at a low cost $300-400-ish iPad. I can throw $100-ish case onto it, and I can know that it's rock solid and it's going to live through the abuse that these guys put it through. And for 500-ish bucks, I can have a rock solid solution in there, and I don't have to spend 10 times that or 3 times that on a phone in order to give to all of these guys. I mean, I think it's a very exciting time to be looking at apps and to be looking at Apple products in the industrial space. I think we're going to see more and more people come to it, especially getting rid of paper, getting rid of some of the crappy electronic form builders that they're using with the social distancing, with needing to find ways to continue to build what they've done, because what they've done in the past no longer works.
Yeah, that's a great kind of pivot from there, because on that same note of like that, the iPad device class, like at the very high end, similar to the phones, right? It's very expensive, like, and it is like questionable on, is this thing really worth this? But that's sort of what you get with high end Apple devices.
Mm-hmm.
So I think something that Apple's done a great job with over the past 3 or 4 years is sort of bring those entry points down. So
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the iPad, there's an iPad out there that's $329,
Mm-hmm.
and it's insane what you get out of that. It's a device that has a fast chip in it. It
Mm-hmm.
has pretty good storage. It supports the Apple Pencil.
Mm-hmm.
The screen is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So for $320, you can get a device that's really going to have an incredible lifetime value for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a device that you buy and then a year and a half from now it's going to stop getting updates of iOS.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about a 5 or 6 year lifetime cycle. In that case, if you're looking to purchase these devices for your company or for multiple people, I think that is a really good place to look and a place to go. So yeah, then there's sort of price points and sizes all in there where you can sort of mix and match for whatever your need be. So yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of interesting. There's obviously that high end about, high value thing that they offer, but they also have some really good sort of price points in there that'll kind of help everyone kind of get in the door.
No, definitely. And if you are a enterprise company and you're looking to buy a bunch of devices, I don't necessarily know what bulk pricing looks like from Apple, but from what we've been told by our clients and the folks at Apple, you get some fairly good discounts when you start buying in the dozens or hundreds of these devices. And then it just makes sense. And to go back to the longevity of what Jarrod was talking about, so there are at least 2 of the now $329 iPads floating around in my immediate family. Beth has one that is 3.5, 4 years old at this point, and it's got iPad OS, and it works really well for what she likes it to do. If it could just remember to charge itself, I feel like it would get a lot more use in the house.
Yeah.
My sister has one of the newer ones that came out last year with the Apple Pencil 1 support, and she absolutely loves it. It replaced a probably 6-year-old iPad whose screen was just like absolutely shattered, and it was to the point of it doesn't make sense to replace the screen. And my dad either has the first generation of the iPad Air or the very beginning of the second generation of the iPad Air, which I think is at least 5 or 6 years old at this.
Yeah.
He won it. He won it somewhere. They gave him an iPad, and so he absolutely loves it. And I know there are a bunch of iPads in your house, Jarrod. Do you want to like talk about how your children use the iPads? Because I feel like children using the iPads and how cases can protect the iPads is a really good parallel to the industrial environment. I'm getting a no shake.
Yeah, we'll skin over that. We have we're again, it's sort of like it's for my work, so I have a few iPads, but
Oh no, I'm not trying to shame you with the amount of iPads you own. I specifically mean, you've got 4 children under 11 or 11 and under, and the way that a child is going to use this device, if there's a way to hack into it, like at 2 years old or 3 years old, my baby cousin Elizabeth had hacked 3 Kindles. Amazon had no idea how it happened, but she had hacked 3 Kindles. And yes, and
Wow.
so children find ways. Like there was an MS-DOS computer that my sister absolutely destroyed growing up because she just pounded on the keyboard. Like at some point, it just stopped working. So I feel like children are a really good parallel to the abuse people would see.
Yeah, they definitely are. But I mean, like even like with our customers, like we have customers that have iPads sort of attached to machinery. They're sort of stationary there. They're not going to move around. We have customers that are performing their work orders on them. So their guys are up in a bucket truck and they've got the iPads in a OtterBox case and they're taking pictures and they're hanging off the side of the bucket to get work done. And kind of everything in between. We had one customer that was using these $329 iPads, and he dropped it into it was some sort of bag house, and it got like basically crushed and folded in half. I think for this environment, like first of all, these devices are more durable now than they have been before. And when you put a case on it, then it's like, practically indestructible to a certain extent. But that's what I like about these sort of cheaper iPads is, for $300 you can get the data that you need out of the field quickly and easily. And if one gets lost or stolen or goes missing or gets smashed or gets run over by a dump truck, like, you just call it a loss and get another one,
Yep.
So that, I think that's the the best case scenario for these iPads. And then maybe next week we can kind of talk about the phone side. I think with the new phones that have come out, and there's a lot of sort of similar options there, maybe even better options on the phone side with this new iPhone SE that comes out. So maybe next go around we can kind of talk through the phone side of things and dive in a little bit there. But last week we started a new segment, and it was our recommendation segment. So I don't know about you, Dave, but I had 3 people message me and say, my buddy Jake was like, well, y'all got me on the stupid fountain pen. I just ordered it. It's supposed to show up. So you might have a new pen addict of your own over there.
I love it. I'm sorry, Jake. It's I'm here. Let's see. I actually have a handful of them next to me. I'm sorry, Jake.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So yeah, he ordered the Pilot Metropolitan that you recommended. So
I love the Metro.
I'll report back on that. But yeah, so let's get to our recommendation section before we jump out here. So for my recommendation, I have some content that'll keep you well informed, or at least entertained during the quarantine. It's two things on the same topic. So the Beastie Boys released a book. They released a book.
Can they read?
Oh, come on. So they released a book. The book's probably a couple months back. Maybe it was around Christmas time. And so I picked it up. I have an Audible subscription, and my best friend Nick was like, man, you got to get this Beastie Boys book. It's incredible. And so the audio book is amazing because the 2 living Beastie Boys do some readings, and then they have like guests that show up. Everyone from like John C. Reilly to, there's like country stars on there. Like Dolly Parton did an episode that did a chapter. Like, it's like crazy. But it's just like such an incredible story of these young kids in New York City that end up like, at 13 and 14 years old, they're like hanging out with the Run DMC and all these like, these people who kind of like started the hip hop movement, and then it kind of tells their story. So the book is really good. It's a really good kind of deep dive into the Beastie Boys. And then last week they released a documentary that's part of Apple TV Plus, or whatever that thing's called. That's basically like a live documentary version of it.
That's cool.
So yeah, the movie's good. If you want kind of like a condensed short version story of the Beastie Boys and their crazy ass life, I would say watch the documentary. But if you're a Beastie Boys fan and you're really interested in hearing some background, then the audiobook is probably the better choice for you. But yeah, there you go. That's my recommendation. What do you got this week, Dave?
No, I love it. Let's continue down the realm of Dave's strange podcasts, which everyone will soon realize are the only podcasts Dave listens to. You guys are probably in quarantine, and you're like, I have nothing better to do than listen to hundreds of hours of solidly questionable podcasts. So if you got, actually, I've got 2 recommendations.
Including this one.
Yes, if you guys have made it this far, you definitely need more podcasts to listen to. The Adventure Zone. It is kind of like a questionable, kind of sort of D&D, not really D&D role-playing fantasy podcast by the McElroys, who you guys may or may not know. They've been around in podcasting since like the beginning of podcasting. And so it's the 3 brothers and their dad, and they go down and they have these, what turns out to be really good adventure series, various iterations of D&D. I would suggest you guys start listening to Balance. They've kind of gotten into it. I would make the caveat that if you guys like actually know the rules of D&D or are fans, just take a couple of deep breaths, because they'll go like 35 minutes without rolling any dice, and they're just like world building. And you're there because you enjoy listening to it, and it's a good time. It takes a little bit to get into, but Beth and I have listened to, I think, all of them. She's actually going back through to listen to them again they're really solid.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like the people.
So talk me through kind of how they structure their shows, because it's like if I'm gonna jump in, like
Mhm.
I don't know if I want to jump into like 180 something episodes, but if I want to just hop in and
It
get
feels
a
like it's
piece
more than
for a few,
180 episodes.
yeah. If you wanna just hop in and get a little taste, is there a good place to start there?
So they've just started releasing a new series called Graduation. I would
Yeah.
not start with that. Like, that is good. Like, we're still getting into it. And what happens with them, for whatever reason, it's like every time it's the first. And so every time they go start a new arc, that they have to like solidly go through it and kind of figure it out again. There's a really good series that they put out. I mean, I just finished listening to it, but I guess it was 2018, called Amnesty. And
Amnesty. Okay, yeah, I saw that.
and so that is a monster of the week. And I'm going to sound like a super nerd when I say all these things. Like, this is not what I do, but I'm going to sound like a super nerd. So it's monster of the week, and they're slightly shorter episodes. It's a good arc. Like, there is fantastic storytelling throughout
Yeah.
throughout all of it.
Maybe after you completely catch up on Adventure Zone, the quarantine will finally be over. Maybe.
And I would say that if you're going to commit to listening to it, listen to 2 or 3 or 4 episodes, because it takes a little while to get into it.
That's what I love about podcasts, is like you listen to these podcasts from just like random people, and like over time you just like you get so much familiarity with them in their life, especially the ones that are really good storytellers. And you just feel like they're like your buddies, like Mark Maron from WTF. I feel like he's like my best friend or whatever. But you just know so much about the folks and you get attached to them, so I think that's really kind of what's best about that podcast format. So yeah, there is a nerdy recommendation for you, but I'm interested to hear what all you guys think about Adventure Zone, because it's a fun show for sure. So why don't we wrap up there? On the next show, we'll kind of dive into the new iPhone SE and talk about that and kind of what that might mean for the industrial setting and kind of the extreme value you kind of getting out of this phone that Apple just released, as well as maybe some other fun topics.
Yeah, and maybe by next week I'll have decided I'm going to buy an iPhone SE. You never know.
Oh wow, look at there, a tease
Probably
from
not.
Dave.
Probably not, but you never know. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, see y'all.
Yeah, bye-bye.